Hello parents and professionals. Today I'm going to be telling you some strategies to help you really pin down and identify a problem when you are perhaps not 100% sure about what the problem actually is. Or you think you know, but then it seems to shift and change into something else. And it feels like one of those shapeshifters that is constantly changing form. And so it feels like you're maybe dealing with multiple problems simultaneously with the young person in your life. Actually, all of those problems might take the root of one thing. So I'm going to help you figure out what that one thing is, so that when you come to work with a professional such as myself or anyone else on the NLP for Kids team, you'll be able to give us a really good starting block by making sure that we really know and understand your problem before we start trying to solve it. So if you would like to know how to pin down your problem, then just keep on watching. Okay, so I'm going to be referring to this as your problem quite a lot of the time, but it may not actually be you that has the problem. It's highly likely that it's a young person that you are interacting with, but you are also working in some respects on their behalf by reaching out and finding some correct type of support for them so that the problem can disappear. However, sometimes it's a real challenge to know exactly what kind of help you need, because you don't really know what kind of problem you've actually got. So sometimes what we see is that there appear to be like millions of problems. Like there's loads and loads and loads of stuff going on. There's problems everywhere. And it's as a result of believing that there's lots and lots of problems that then everyone starts to feel overwhelmed, and actually the problem then turns into overwhelm and anxiety. And by the time you come to engage with any kind of mental health professional or someone that helps deal with emotional wellness, that it can take them longer. It can take them longer to identify and drill down to know what the right solutions are going to be, because they haven't quite got a firm definition on actually what the problem is. The other thing that can happen sometimes is, as well as having what appear to be like multiples of different issues going on, is it might seem as if you have a problem that is very difficult to define. For example, if you don't feel like you could put it into a sentence or two, then you have a fluffy problem. It is ill-defined. You don't know, you can't really express it without using lots and lots of words and paragraphs. Then that means that you don't really know what your problem is yet. When you know what your problem is, you should be able to say it quite succinctly in just a couple of sentences. If you're not at that stage, then you're probably not yet ready for reaching out for help. Or if you do, what you're going to be getting help with is defining the problem and not solving the problem yet. So it's a good idea for you to do that little bit of work yourselves before you go to see a practitioner, so that you can then at least say to the practitioner, it's this. This is what we need help with. Whereas if you are finding that you're kind of jumping down lots of different rabbit holes and spin-offs and tangents, then it's probably the case that we haven't quite got definition on what this problem actually is yet. So either way, whether you appear to have tons of problems or whether you appear to have a big fluffy problem and are not entirely sure how to describe it, the strategies I'm going to share with you today are going to help you overcome that hurdle before you start reaching out for help. So the very first solution I'm going to give you is possibly better for addressing the issue of multiple problems rather than the fluffy problem issue that we've talked about. The reason why this is a good strategy for that is because quite often we'll find that when there are multiple problems occurring in a young person's life, actually they all have a very similar thread. We just need to know what's the similar thread that they all carry. And a way in which to do that is to look at each of the problems in isolation and ask yourself the question, what are all of these an example of? Because perhaps they are all an example of a young person who is anxious. Perhaps they are all an example of a young person who is angry. Perhaps they are all an example of a young person who is fearful. So look at the individual problems, maybe even get them sort of written down on a list. And the question that you need to ask yourself is, what are all of these an example of? If you were to sort of bag them up into bigger subject areas, what is that bigger subject area? Maybe there are 1 or 2 different subject areas, but there's probably not going to be more than 3. And I would say 3 different problems simultaneously that are all quite big subject areas are quite rare. If there are 3, very often there is one of them that is feeding another. And so a question that we then might come to ask you when you do reach out for help is there any one of these problems which, if we solved it, is going to have a positive impact on the other 2? And if the answer is yes, then we're going to look at the one first that's going to have the biggest impact, because then actually we might not even need to do any work on the others. So by creating a kind of sack around all of the problems and saying these are all the same, they can all get housed together, is a really helpful way to not then have to deal with lots and lots of little problems, but instead for us as practitioners to do perhaps only just 1 or 2 interventions that's going to help tackle all of those problems simultaneously. In NLP terms, we call that chunking up, and it is where we look at things that have a similar subject area and look at how we can categorize them all in the same way. The other thing that we can do when looking at commonalities is to think about a common denominator. And in this instance, I'm talking less about an overall theme that different problems or the fluffy problem has, but it's more to do with who and where the interactions are happening. So, for example, a common denominator around a fluffy problem or multiple problems could be school. It could be a particular friend. It could even be you. So we want to sort of look and see, is there any sort of commonality? So let me give you a firmer example. Sometimes I may speak with a parent who has separated from another parent, and the parent who perhaps moved out and doesn't have main full-time custody of the child takes a bit of a breather, steps back for a while, and then later re-engages and enters back into that child's life. If we then see that there is a change in that child's behavior, or that there are some problems that start to arise, then we might say, what's a common denominator in something that's happened at the same time as those problems arising? Is there something that has changed, or something that has maybe caused that child to spin out in some way? And in the example I gave you, it would be, yeah, we've had a parent who's re-entered into their life. That's not necessarily a negative thing, but it's possibly caused a little bit of disruption, and we need to wait for things to settle down and to make sure that they've got some strategies to help them as they move forward and go through that settling down process. So it might be that there is something else which is on the fringes of that young person's life, which are not directly associated to the problem that they are experiencing or the many problems that they are experiencing, but that outside stressor is maybe causing them to cope less well than they usually would do. So we want to be thinking, is there any other common denominators that are going on around that young person that could be causing influence on them, and as a result, these problems are manifesting? And finally, I think in particular that last point that I've just given you really lends itself towards what we refer to in NLP as our cause and effect equation, simply meaning that one thing causes something else to happen. And sometimes cause and effect is a good thing, and sometimes cause and effect has negative effects. So something happens that causes something negative to happen as a result. We also have a saying within NLP that you need to be at cause, which means that you always look at yourself and your interactions and think, how may I be causing what's happening here to happen? Like, what's my influence? What am I doing to either cause or help maintain a particular problem? And sometimes when we are dealing with young people, they do not necessarily need to change anything themselves. They do sometimes need that environmental shift to happen in order to really be able to settle back down and get back into the swing of life again. And I often meet young people who report to me that if things were a bit calmer at home, that if I wasn't under so much pressure at school, and they are telling me that even though I could give them useful resources, coping strategies, more resilience, and all of those good things that we talk about a young person having, actually what would really help them in life is if things on the outside were not quite so chaotic. And if we are, as parents and as practitioners who are engaging with young people, also thinking about cause and effect, then we also need to be saying, what effect am I having on this young person with what I am doing, or what I am sharing, or how I am influencing them? Because sometimes you can make a really big shift in a young person's attitude, in their mental state, in how well they're managing their emotions by you inputting something different. And that's not to say then that you solve their problem for them, but what you do is you create the right environment for them to be able to solve the problem for themselves. So think about the influence that you're having, the input that you have, and how if that is not bringing about the desired result right now, maybe it means you need to do something different. Now, when you come to do something different, different doesn't necessarily mean that you're going to hit the winning formula first time around as soon as you switch and change in some way. It might actually make things worse. But if you make things worse, it still tells you that you have influence there, that you've got some power over this situation and what's going on with somebody else who's completely outside of you. And that's good news, because it means then that if you switch and do something in a slightly different way again, you're going to carry influence, and that at that stage you might start to cultivate more of a winning formula for helping that young person to then get into a better coping strategy and to be able to come up with solutions for themselves as well. So just think about the influence that you have, the cause and effect equation that you are putting out there in the world, and how you can cause another person to either get better at or worse at resolving their situation by changing how you engage and interact with them. And that is everything that I wanted to share with you for today. So you've got 3 tactics there for being able to really help a young person define and begin to resolve their problems. If you have found this stuff useful for you today and you are here watching on YouTube, then make sure you give the video a thumbs up, subscribe if you're not subscribed already, and click the notifications bell so that you get notified the next time one of our videos pops up within your video feed there. But for now, thank you all so much for watching and listening, and I will see you in my next video. Oh, and leave a comment if you have one. Perhaps there are some strategies like the ones I've shared with you today that you found particularly helpful in the past. I would love to hear about them, because I almost want to put together a list of different strategies for everyone to use and engage with, particularly when you have fluffy or ill-defined problems. If you've got ways that have worked in the past of helping you to really drill down and get that couple of sentences to define what the problem really is, then make sure you share those strategies in the comments box down below as well. So thank you again for watching and listening. I will see you all in the next video. Bye.